They are proposing to tackle pollution and climate change through the use of giant vacuums.
Governor of New York wanting to create quarantine camps, not just for COVID, but like basically for anything the government deems a public health risk. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjakovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to do a Friday mashup and give you all the big and weird stories going on this week. And there's quite a few of them. So I'm just going to start with the big story that seems to be the only damn thing the mainstream news wants to cover, which is Biden's impending doom. So Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, finally announced that they're going to move forward with an impeachment inquiry on Biden. And this comes after Congressman Matt Gaetz started questioning Speaker McCarthy's inaction on not just this, but numerous matters. And of course, the mainstream news is repeating the same rehearsed line, which is that there is no evidence whatsoever that Biden was involved in Hunter's business dealings, which of course is like total bullshit. And Tara, it totally brings me back to memories of my childhood with Bill Clinton saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. And here they're like, Biden did not have business relations with Hunter.
And
but
there
of
was
course,
evidence for both.
right. And like there is evidence. There's a lot of evidence. And the reason they're starting with an impeachment inquiry instead of going like straight to voting on impeachment is because this is going to give Congress the power to get all of the bank records so that it's right there, crystal clear, no one can deny it. And that will link Biden allegedly to the money that was coming in from China, the Ukraine, Romania, and whatever other shady business dealings they had. So once they have all of that rock solid evidence in place, then they're going to vote on impeachment. And when you have undeniable evidence in black and white, like it's going to put Democrats in a situation where if they vote against it, which they probably will because they all band together, they're going to have to explain like why they ignored evidence that's right in their face of a president dealing with bribery. And this was hilarious. So Newsmax reported that they received a letter from the White House that presumably went to all the media outlets saying it's time for news outlets to amp up scrutiny on the impeachment inquiry. So, yeah, if anyone still questioned whether the government was pushing propaganda, there's your proof. And Newsmax even posted the full letter for everyone to read. And what sucks about the whole thing is I feel like no matter what happens, there's not going to be a satisfying outcome. It's like if they do end up impeaching him, then we have to deal with Kamala until the election. If he dies before he's impeached, then there's no justice that's really served. So I don't know, Tara, about you, but like I feel like I will not be satisfied until I see people go to jail, preferably the Cobb Mafia in orange jumpsuits.
Yeah, like there really doesn't seem to be any kind of positive outcome here. And I don't even think it's like a lesser of two evils situations because, well, Kamala. So we're just going to be stuck with either this bumbling geriatric dementia-ridden puppet because, I mean, the diversity hire looks good on paper. It's the VP, right? But even the libtards know that she's entirely useless. And her word salad gibberish is nothing but like fodder for social media memes. So, but honestly, like, does any of this even matter? Like, no, the Cobb Mafia is pulling the strings as usual. They're going to find a way to either use this opportunity to get rid of both Biden and Kamala, and they'll put their preferred person in power, or they're going to distract us with some, new manufactured crisis to conveniently delay the impeachment process until the elections, and then we'll have the same outcome, which is them putting their selected person in power. And so, like you, the only way I can even see any kind of justice playing out with this would be if the Obamas and the Clintons were taken out of the equation, put in those orange jumpsuits, and held accountable. But we also know that's not going to happen.
No, that's never going to happen. The only person that they want to see in an orange jumpsuit is Trump. which leads me to Trump. And, we've all heard how Fani Willis brought RICO charges against 19 people, including Trump in Georgia. But what you may not have heard is that Georgia AG Chris Carr is fighting back. And this week, he filed RICO charges against 61 Antifa members who tried to stop an Atlanta police training center from being constructed by committing acts of terrorism. And Tara, do you remember? I think we talked about this on an episode, way back when it happened.
Yeah.
And I guess they took interstate funding to finance their activities. And so he's filing charges. And this is the action that needs to be taken. I'm so sick and tired of Republicans having no backbone while the Democrats just play dirty left and right. So it's nice to see someone that's actually taking action and trying to do something about this.
Yeah, and it's funny how the ACLU is all up in arms about this, and they're calling it targeting people who disagree with the government and treating protesters and community activists like an organized crime ring. And I read an article where a senior staff attorney at the ACLU stated, quote, "The right to protest is fundamental to our democracy if that dissent is patriotic. And we have a right to disagree and dissent with those in power and demand a better world." Patriotic dissent. How can anyone not see the hypocrisy of the left? I have 3 words in response to this, and that's January 6th, insurrection. And I'm saying insurrection with air quotes. And I mean, isn't this insane? I guess I just forget that we live in bizarro world where actual patriotic protests are code for domestic terrorism. And then on the flip side, burning, looting, and destroying shit is standing up for democracy. Okay, but I'm going to go off on a tangent. So let's switch gears because that will just take me off into a different direction. So in other news, I know we frequently give updates on the migrant crisis in New York more than pretty much any other city or state. But Stephanie, it's like how you're obsessed with the Maui fires. I am obsessed with the train wreck that is New York City. And I liken it to when I watch 90 Day Fiance, because that's a train wreck show. And I can't look away though, because it just gets more fascinating and ridiculous by the episode. And so that's basically what's happening in New York City. And you have the wheel of unaccountability that just goes around and around and around, as Mayor Adams blames the Biden administration for the out of control migrant crisis, and the Biden administration blames Mayor Adams. And so last week, Adams gave a press conference where he called the influx of migrants a, quote, financial tsunami. And he said that the migrant crisis is going to destroy New York City if the Biden administration doesn't do something about it and start providing aid. And so now this week, the Department of Homeland Security is claiming that Adams doesn't have an exit strategy for the thousands of refugees and asylum seekers that the sanctuary city openly embraces. And I mean, let's say they put them up in hotels and homeless shelters and school gyms and churches and police stations and where else? In the park? I mean, everywhere.
Yeah, they have
right?
that tent city that they put up.
Yeah. And so, according to an article in the Daily Mail, a Department of Homeland Security employee apparently called it not an operationally sound effort. And that's what we've been saying for a very long time on this podcast. And then meanwhile, you have the natives growing restless because New York residents are sick of this shit and they continue to protest the influx of migrants. And I think it was just last week or maybe the week before, we were talking about how Mayor Adams opened all these shelters in the 5 boroughs to house migrants. And I guess he opened up 200 shelters. And I don't think we mentioned this part, but protesters showed up outside of his residence at Gracie Mansion, and they city residents, and they were demanding that the shelters be closed to migrants. And, fights took place and punches were thrown. And of course, the people who were in support of Americans over migrants were called Trump supporters. And some woman tried to burn the American flag, and the cops who were there were called the white supremacist NYPD. And it was basically a total shit show, and it had absolutely no impact on the migrant crisis.
I would love to see how many of those people took a migrant home with them to give them shelter.
Yeah, exactly. Or let them camp out in their yard.
Yeah.
But speaking of cops, sometimes I truly miss being a cop. And then I read stories like the one I'm about to tell you about, and then I think like, nope, I'm good. So earlier this week, Mayor Adams announced that New York City is going to be cutting overtime pay for police officers in order to pay for the migrant crisis. And it's not just for cops, it's also firefighters, corrections officers, and sanitation employees. And I guess all of these departments were told that they have to submit an overtime pay reduction plan and start tracking it every month. And oh, there's a hiring freeze that's part of this plan as well. So, the head of the Police Benevolent Association, Patrick Henry, told the Washington Post that it's basically going to be impossible for NYPD to reduce their overtime unless their staffing crisis is resolved because they're still currently thousands of officers short and they don't have anywhere near the adequate personnel to effectively police the city. And honestly, I don't know how any NYPD cops are still working at this point, except I think they negotiated a pretty decent contract back in April that gave them a fairly significant raise. But I'm sorry, this is a slap in the face for all public safety personnel. And they're all basically being told that housing illegal migrants is more important than supporting the men and women who risk their lives every day to protect the city.
Meanwhile, Mayor Adams calls cops when these migrants show up at his house. Then he wants the support
Yes.
of, the police and everything else. Like if I were them, I'd be like, sorry, we're not coming to back you up, Adams. Like
Yeah,
screw
all
him.
our shifts are over and we don't have overtime.
Exactly. Well, speaking of New York, I was seeing all these posts on TikTok about Kathy Hochul, who is the governor of New York, wanting to create quarantine camps, not just for COVID, but like basically for anything the government deems a public health risk, where they can basically do whatever they want to you. And I thought this was weird because I hadn't heard about this other than these posts I started seeing everywhere. So I looked it up and actually ended up watching the hearing that took place on September 13th. And the one article I was able to find was from the rochesterfirst.com that said in July, Senator George Borrello and other plaintiffs won a lawsuit against Governor Hochul and the State Department of Health on a regulation that would allow the Commissioner of Health to issue isolation or quarantine orders to control the spread of a communicable disease. And a verdict was ruled against the Hochul administration, striking down the regulation. And then New York Attorney General Letitia James, the same lunatic going after Trump, filed an appeal to overturn the ruling on behalf of the Hochul administration and the Department of Health. So after the hearing, like this hearing that was on the 13th, which was the appeal, Senator Borrello gave a statement outside the courthouse saying, quote, if we don't stop them here, this goes on to other things and it goes to other states. And it really crumbles the foundation of our nation, which is individual liberty, end quote. And the front of the courthouse was filled with people carrying signs saying no quarantine camps. And I guess it's expected that the judges are going to take a few months to reach a decision on this. And like I said, when I tried to find info on this, no big news articles came up. And the things that did come up said that these quarantine camps were just rumors, according to the quote experts. Well, I'm going to go ahead and play a clip directly from the hearing itself so you can see why you can't trust the news or fact checkers and decide for yourself what this is.
Regulation says they can knock on your door with no due notice and they can hand you an isolation or a quarantine order. Ex parte, no hearing, no due notice, no right to have an attorney before you get locked up or locked down in your house, no right to contest any sort of evidence against you. There is no evidence against you because there's no hearing provided in Rule 2.13. It says you have the right to an attorney and judicial review after you're locked up, right? It's guilty until proven innocent. It's tremendous.
We understand that.
Okay, sorry, getting a little emotional. Sorry. So just one other thing on the conflict between the rule and the law, Section 2120 of the public health law, is that the law clearly says that yes, you are infected, and yes, you are a public health threat, you can't or you won't comport yourself in a manner to protect those around you, then they can issue an isolation or a quarantine order and put you into a hospital for care so you can get better. That is not what the rule says. The rule says the commissioner of health can pick any place that the commissioner of health wants to put you. You have no say. And including the words residential or, quote, residential or temporary housing. So it's a stark contrast to our law, which we've had for 70 years, which sets out the policy that our legislature carefully weighed the rights and the concern of the government and then came up with this law. So that's what I wanted to say on
Tara, that sounds freaking scary. A lot like quarantine camps to me, that they can just take you away to wherever they want without any evidence or reason. And if you contest it, you're screwed. Like, it sounds like if you don't comply, they can do whatever they want with you. And I feel like this is totally being set up to attack conservatives that won't get the vax or quarantine.
Yeah, and you know who's not going to be housed in these quarantine camps in New York? I'm going to guess the illegal asylum seekers who are like bringing these communicable diseases across the border and spreading throughout New York City in the first place, because it would just be so unconstitutional to violate the non-existent rights of non-citizens who are here illegally, and we only violate the rights of American citizens who don't comply with the leftist agenda, and that's where the real problem lies. And speaking of problems, Stephanie, I know we just did a climate-related episode, but I cannot resist bringing up this story. So, have you heard the latest move from the Biden administration that they are proposing to tackle pollution and climate change through the use of giant vacuums?
No, haven't heard that one yet.
Yeah, well, this came out in an article in the Washington Post that the Department of Energy wants to use giant vacuums to slow global warming. You heard that correctly. Vacuums to slow global warming. So the Biden administration is proposing, or has proposed, a $1.2 billion plan to basically suck pollution out of the atmosphere using enormous vacuums. And then all of the pollution is going to be buried in the ground.
Wow.
And I'm wondering, like, is this a new trend or something with burying?
Is this like satire? Like, what the hell?
I know, like last week you talked about how Bill Gates wants to chop down trees to prevent climate change and bury them in the ground, and now we want to bury air pollution. So, I mean, I guess that would make sense considering that this administration tries to bury and hide pretty much everything. But in all seriousness, after doing a little bit of research, I'm really not sure what I think about this because it's kind of interesting, but I also feel like burying contaminants in the ground really isn't the best idea. I mean,
sounds like that would just pollute the water.
Right, because yeah, it's going to seep up from the ground, isn't it? But apparently, this is a process called direct air capture, or DAC. And the technology is coming from two of the nation's largest oil and gas producers. And one of them has already leased over 100,000 acres near the Gulf Coast to start this project. And I read an article in this publication called The Cool Down. And it said the plan is to pump pollution sucked from the air back deep into the ground and nullify its ability to cause warming while simultaneously pushing out oil without contributing additional pollution to the atmosphere. And eventually, the goal is that these giant vacuums are going to help create net zero fuels. And reportedly, scientists think this is a potential way to keep the planet from overheating. And who is quickly becoming one of my favorite people to make fun of, Department of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm told CNBC that there are hubs being built in Texas and Louisiana that could theoretically remove more than 2.2 million tons of pollution from the air every year, which she said is like, quote, taking nearly 500,000 gas-powered cars off the road. And apparently this idea is trending with some of the biggest companies in the world. I read in a publication called The Street that shipping giant Amazon is on board, and they're vowing to remove 250,000 metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere over the next 10 years. And Amazon is going to be investing $2 million from its climate pledge fund to invest in a startup company using this technology. And in a recent press release this past Tuesday, Amazon claimed that, quote, carbon captured under this agreement will be stored deep underground in saline aquifers, which are large geological rock formations saturated with salt water. And the press release also stated that with DAC technology, filtered out CO2 can also be used to create products like concrete, bricks, and cement. And then in addition to Amazon, Microsoft is getting in on the game, and they're going to be working with another company to buy carbon removal credits. And their aim is to remove 350,000 tons of carbon from the atmosphere at a predicted cost of more than $200 million. So Stephanie, what is your take on this?
Okay, first of all, I would love to hear the conversation between these oil companies and Jennifer Granholm. Like, yeah, okay, so the government, you go ahead and give us billions of dollars and we will suck the CO2 out of the air with a vacuum and use it to push out more oil. And she's like, really? Great.
Yeah.
That's how that conversation probably went. But I think like in order to buy into this, you have to first buy into the whole idea that CO2 is a pollutant in the first place and that it's bad for the environment. And I don't. Like, I think instead of spending billions of dollars on a giant vacuum that like this, it's just hilarious. Why not just plant more trees? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like trees are natural air purifiers. They'll absorb the CO2, they'll clean the oxygen. Like, I don't understand why this isn't more of a thing right now for all these CO2 warriors.
Because we're going to chop down the trees and bury them in the ground.
I mean, it's like we're living in the Twilight Zone. And I'm sorry, but anything that Biden or Jennifer Granholm are involved in, or God forbid, Bill Gates and Microsoft, then no, like I don't think that's going to be a great idea based on their track record of horrible ideas that end up hurting us more than they ever help us. So yeah, I'm not going with that one. I do have a very strange story. There was the very first UFO congressional hearing ever in Mexico. And get this, they brought out 2 preserved alien bodies that are apparently 2,000 years old. They have 3 fingers on each hand and elongated heads. And they're really tiny. And I am telling you, they look exactly like E.T., like the movie E.T. Exactly. And then the creepy part is they're saying that they like x-rayed these things and showed that one of them had eggs inside of it. I think the whole thing is BS. Like, I really do. Like, I think this is 100% a fear tactic, or like, I don't know, just to kind of like get us off of everything else happening in the world, like maybe part of this Project Bluebeam or something. And it's just like what bothers me is I feel like they keep trying, right? Like they tried COVID to make us afraid and like that quit working. So then they tried climate change and like, oh, the world's going to end because of climate change. And then like that didn't really work. No one's afraid of it. And so now they're literally rolling out aliens that look just like the cute little alien on ET. And I'm sorry, I'm not scared. What do you think, Tara? Are you like buying into this whole thing?
If this was coming directly from our own government, I would say definitely a fear tactic or a distraction. But this is coming from Mexico. So, like, what's the angle here? And why now? Because according to the New York Post, the hearing revealed that these alleged alien bodies were found in 2017 in Peru. So, why are they coming out now in 2023? And I guess Mexican scientists have tested the DNA and they're claiming that it's 30% unknown and not part of our terrestrial evolution. Again, why now? And I read in American military news that this congressional hearing was focused on the Aerial Space Protection Law, which would make Mexico the first nation in the world to publicly acknowledge an alien presence on Earth. But at the same time, earlier this month, the Pentagon launched a new website where Americans can see the declassified videos and pictures and other information related to the UAP cases that we talked about this a couple weeks ago, I think, where all of these classified cases have been now approved for release to the general public. And again, the timing, like, why is all this stuff suddenly being declassified now after years of denial and silence and, the alien cover-ups? Like, who the fuck knows? And if anything, like, I can see how this might all just be part of the plan by the Biden administration, because like you said, COVID wasn't really working. The climate change thing, like, it's a half-ass. Some people are falling for it. And so maybe this is the last resort. Maybe the alien invasion is like the last resort if all the other manufactured crises that they're planning just don't work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're asking a really good question of like, why now? All these hearings, all these whistleblowers, like everything just happens to be coming out now. And like the government used to laugh when someone would suggest aliens, but now like all of a sudden they're going to take it seriously. I just tend to question it. And like you said, especially coming from the Biden administration, these were from Mexico, but the timing is just strange. So I don't know. We'll keep an eye on it and we'll keep everyone posted. If they are real, I want one. Like that, it was adorable. Looked like a little ET. So that's our Friday mashup of all the stuff going on in the world right now. And we will be back here on Monday with more updates for everyone. Thanks for tuning in. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.